I've got one of these, and no doubt you have too. Nowadays they're indispensable. And you know what it's like? You try and take these away from somebody, try and take it away from a teenager, and they can't give it to you because they can't live without their mobile phone. And it's a bit like nuclear weapons. We've got 9 countries who possess nuclear weapons, and each of them declares that they really don't want these weapons, that they don't want to use these weapons. And you know, our country, for instance, has signed up to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which commits us to trying to get rid of these weapons. But try taking these weapons away from those countries, and no, they can't do without them, just as a young person can't do without their mobile phone. It's a comfort blanket. It gives them that sense of that feeling of security. And yet we know that these weapons, in actual fact, don't make the world secure. They make the world feel more insecure. So much so that we're now spending more money on deterrence, more money renewing and renovating these weapons of mass destruction, spending billions every year and engaging so many. I mean, this place is expanding. Faslane is expanding. Coalport is expanding. We're increasing our stock of nuclear weapons, and yet we have signed up to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and we say we don't want these weapons. We want a world without these nuclear weapons. We're not taking any action to make that happen. At least back in the 1960s and 70s, the various governments were talking to each other, and you had the SALT treaties, and then in the 80s and 90s you had the START treaties, whereby they agreed to cut back on the number of nuclear missiles and nuclear weapons. But nowadays it's a great disappointment. Every time the topic of nuclear weapons comes up in the Parliament in Westminster, the MPs just automatically sign it all through. There's no resistance to these nuclear weapons. We spend billions every year on them, and yet our parliamentarians, our governments, let us down. And nobody nowadays is talking. They're not talking to each other anymore about nuclear deterrent and cutting down the nuclear deterrent or cutting down the nuclear weapons. Instead, our present governments are, in fact, expanding and updating the nuclear weapons for a new generation. Pope Francis has pointed out the immorality, not just to use these weapons, but the immorality even to produce and possess these weapons, because of the great waste of human and financial resources that could be used elsewhere. And before him, Pope Benedict said that deterrence itself was increasing the arms race, because countries, in order to keep their deterrent effective, had to continually renew and update their weapon systems. And that's what's happening, not just in our country, but in other countries throughout the world where they possess these nuclear weapons. So I would urge our politicians, and I would urge our governments to give up that comfort blanket. We all know there was a world before mobile phones, and we all lived in that world, and we all had lived fulfilled lives in that world. We don't need our mobile phones. We don't need our nuclear weapons. And I would urge them, just as the previous generation signed up to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, I would urge the present governments to sign up to the treaty banning the possession of nuclear weapons, which has been passed by the United Nations, so that we don't do as we're doing now, create a new updated version of these weapons, so that these weapons will continue to exist for another generation and more to come. What can we do? The moral arguments are useless. We can talk all we like about the morality. The financial arguments don't seem to cut anything either, spending billions every year on these weapons. And even the military arguments, because there are plenty of people in the military who will tell you that these weapons don't serve any useful purpose. All we can do is do what we're doing today, is pray. and pray that our politicians and our governments who make these decisions will see that these weapons serve no purpose at all. They don't increase our security. They make their world more insecure, and they waste so many precious human resources. Today we are here to pray. Let's continue to pray that our politicians and those who make those decisions will have a change of heart and have the courage to cast away their comfort blanket and rid the world of these weapons of mass destruction. Let's pray to the Lord our God for peace, not just words of peace, but peace brought around through our actions. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer.